Well, thanks for doing this. It's a pleasure to meet you, finally.
Likewise.
Well, these are chronological things, the way we try to do it from the beginning to present. Let's start with your early life. How did the Roman Catholic faith play a role in your upbringing? I'm just curious.
Well, it was a big part of it, I think. I grew up in Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to an Irish Catholic family, so being Catholic was just part of the woodwork. And we went regularly to church, went to parochial schools, and was very involved in that sense, not in an exceptional way, I'd say, but in an ordinary way of being a Catholic was part of your life. And the rhythms of the year, the liturgical year, and the customs and practices and so on were simply part of our family life, our whole family, our extended family.
When did you begin to know that you had a calling, that you wanted to serve Christ in the church?
Well, my father worked for DuPont and was transferred a number of times during the war, especially. And his last transfer was to Louisville, Kentucky. So we moved from the Philadelphia area, Springfield, Pennsylvania, to Louisville, which was a big change, really. And we happened to move into a parish that was run by a religious order called the Passionists. And at that time, at that location, they had their seminarians who were in their last 2 years of preparation for ordination. So I was an older boy and involved in the way a lot of Catholic kids were, and really began to admire and to know some of those students, those seminarians. And I remember especially one priest or seminarian at that time showed me a file card with all of the quotes that he had that he was going to use as in preaching. And I thought, that's really impressive. He's really getting ready. So it was in that circumstance I began to feel this is a way of life attractive to me. And later, after 2 years of college, I would join the Passionists.
There are a lot of orders you could have joined.
Right.
The Jesuits and so on. What appealed to you about the Passionists and their creed?
Well, their work, the Passionists' work, is mainly missionary work. And I remember being very impressed hearing a Passionist missionary who was in Korea. And he worked on the island of Sorokto with the lepers. And I thought, wow, that would be great. I had read stories of Damien of Molokai, who was a Belgian priest, later made a saint who worked with the lepers in Hawaii, Molokai, and actually contracted leprosy. So it was a very heroic story. And I thought, well, what a wonderful way. He was a very engaging priest, this Passionist that I met. So my desire in joining them was to hope, well, I could be a missionary, maybe sent to Korea, maybe work with the people with the lepers. And it seemed like a wonderful service to a young person looking for something ideal to do in your life.
But the Passionists had other thoughts about what you were going to be doing.
That's right, yeah. As I was approaching the last few years of my preparation, I was assigned to begin to prepare for biblical studies. And people have asked me, well, when did you desire to do this? And I said, it was really like an arranged marriage, This was a hole they needed to fill. One of our priests actually had been drafted by the Archbishop of Chicago, Cardinal Meyer, to be his theological expert at the council, Father Barnabas Ahern, and he had taught Scripture in our seminary. So I was being groomed to replace him because they thought he would go on for other things, which in fact he did. I love, though, the Scriptures, and once I got into it, and I mean, it's been a great blessing in my life to go in this direction.
You went to Belgium to study for your doctorate?
I went, yes, to the University of Louvain. At that time, especially right after the Vatican Council, many of the faculty from the University of Louvain were theological experts and counselors at the council. Many of them helped shape the agenda there. So their theology faculty was very well known, and in discussions with my own superiors, we ended up choosing to go to Belgium. A lot of my forebears had gone to Rome to study, but it was interesting to me to go to Northern European university and a very progressive setting to study.
I don't want to get too far ahead of the story, but as you say, you were being trained as an academician in a way, but the priesthood itself as a calling, you described it as a blessing to have entry to people's lives, to celebrate the Eucharist in times of joy and times of sorrow. Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's something that has been a constant through my life, and almost a kind of constant surprise, with all the troubles that have been associated with the priesthood in recent times. As a matter of fact, that people have still a great reservoir of trust, and you find yourself with people who are strangers confiding in you. You get to know people. I mean, this has been part of my job when I got into not only academic work, but administrative work as head of Catholic Theological Union with members of the board and friends and donors. You not only know them in a professional way, but sometimes your priesthood opens up other aspects of their lives that you feel very privileged to be with. And also to be present, to be able to speak about the faith, speak about the gospel, to celebrate the Eucharist with people. There's a kind of intimacy there that is very hard to articulate, but very real and sustains you in your vocation. It has for me, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an anchor in an unfriendly world.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. Yes.
You came here to Chicago as a professor of New Testament studies. Let's talk about this institution. This is the largest graduate school for those seeking masters and doctorates in your profession. What is the mission, the goal of what this institution does?
Well, CTU is interesting how it began, because I think that sort of defines its mission. Right towards the end of the Second Vatican Council, Cardinal Joseph Soenens, who was a Belgian cardinal who was very influential at the council himself, a very thoughtful, progressive person, he was invited to give an address at the University of Chicago. And he spoke about seminary education in the wake of the council. And he said it should be urban-based rather than off in a contemplative setting, so it could be close to the human situation. He said it should be in the context of a great university, so that it would be challenged to have an academic quality, that what the culture expected of good academics. And it should be ecumenical in spirit. And so Gerald Brouwer was the dean of the Divinity School at the University of Chicago at that time, and he knew some Catholic priests who were involved in seminary education. He said, there's no Catholic presence here. So that led, he invited them to come to Chicago. That led to 3 religious orders, ultimately, to set up shop here, bought the old Aragon Hotel here in Hyde Park, merged their faculties, merged their libraries, merged their student bodies, and began sort of a bold experiment, I guess you would say, of collaboration. Since then, CTU has grown to have 24 religious orders sending their students here. And it's not only the seminarians, but there's also many laymen and women who study here for kind of church service in a variety of ways. So it's that setting is still important to us, being urban, trying to be really involved in the setting of people's lives, to have a high quality academics, and to be involved with, there's many other schools here in the Chicago area, Protestant schools, Jewish schools, Spiritus. And so we're very closely associated with them. And that has grown now to include interreligious interaction with the Muslim and Jewish communities here. CTU is really very involved in that. So for me, it's been a very exciting academic environment, quality academic environment, but also in touch with reality, let's say. We're here in Hyde Park, we're here in an urban setting. We're mixing with a wide diversity of peoples. So it's a good spot to be.
Well, I've talked with other laureates over the years who have been involved in the ecumenical life of this city,
Mhm.
like Rabbi Shulman
Yes.
north of here, and of course I never got to meet Cardinal Bernardin, but I did do the piece on him with a lot of his colleagues, and there was a spirit of we have to reach out, we have to understand each other. And I remember what Herman told me, that when he met the Cardinal, he said, well, just think of me as your brother.
Yeah.
And
Joseph, your brother. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Joseph, your brother.
Yeah.
So this is all coming together at a time of a lot of growth and a lot of outreach here.
Yeah, and it's something that maybe it's a little bit of a hidden secret about Chicago. Some years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, one of the top Vatican officials, Cardinal Cassidy, who was head of the Vatican Department for Interreligious Affairs, was here in Chicago to speak. And he said that the ecumenical and interreligious network is no more advanced anywhere in the world than it is in Chicago, that Chicago is the leading place of this. And this is really true, I found by experience. I've been very involved in the dialogue in different parts of the country and around the world, actually. And there is a network of friends here in Chicago. You mentioned Rabbi Shulman would be one of these people. There's extraordinary representatives of the Muslim community. I think of Karim Irfan and others. And the Christian and Catholic involvement. Cardinal Bernardin, Cardinal George is certainly in that line. And this is ongoing. It's been sustained, and it deals with, not simply like interreligious conversations, but it's trying to bring together people to address issues of the common good, violence, the schools, employment issues, and so on, safety questions, working with government officials and so on. And this is a remarkable reality with all of Chicago's challenges and Illinois' challenges. There's something here in the water maybe that lends to a kind of openness and outreach and mutual respect and friendship that's been very unique and very important.
People who are engaged in civic life here, like John Canning, for example, and others, have said, it's 7 million people over the whole area, but it's like a small town. We all know each other, and we're all associated, so we can pick up a phone and do something. And I suspect the same is true in the religious community.
That's very true. When there is some point of tension, there's been some violence against a synagogue or some Islamophobia, or something happens where it could be a strain, it could be a source of division, people can pick up the phone first before going to the press or making some public statement on it. They can say, what's the story, and let's hash this out. And that's a very, very important reality to have. And it's something that, the comment of Mr. Canning about a village, that's something I experienced in Chicago as I got involved as president here at CTU. Of course, fundraising was a big part of it. And it's really friend making, and you begin to see that there's a network of people in the civic leadership, in the business leadership, in the religious leadership that have a lot of mutual respect and connections here in Chicago, and that I've always been struck by that, and I think that helps us at certain times of crisis as well as celebration, but it's an important feature of our life here.
It's been a big revelation to me as I've worked on this particular series. I also cover the legislature, so I know a lot of the lawmakers from Chicago and the Collier counties, and get a sense of what the place is like. In terms of your being here at CTU, when was the first class here at the institution?
1968. We began in fall of 1968.
And when did you arrive?
I arrived in 72.
So you have been here really through the formative years.
I would say that's true. People that were here from the beginning say the first 3 years were quite unique, and there were a lot of things to work out, a lot of tensions, and some have said if they hadn't merged the library, it might have fallen apart, but it was too much trouble to separate the books out again. But in fact, over the years, it has strengthened, it has grown tremendously. And I think because of the vision and the generosity of the people who founded it. This was not an act of consolidation coming here. Each of their individual schools were thriving at that time, but they felt they could do something together that would be a better quality and what they could do separately. And they felt doing it here was important. The three orders that began, their theology schools were out in the countryside. And but they said, let's come to the city and let's really train people, train the men and women who would study here to be in touch with the realities of human life, to bring the gospel really in a realistic sense to the people around us.
Well, in listening to some of your remarks, I get the sense that there is a great spiritual life here coupled with the intellectual rigor of an advanced university curriculum.
Well, that's our hope, and one other important ingredient here is that many of the religious communities that are part of CTU, that form the corporation of it, are missionary communities. They're international communities, and about a third of our student body are international students from about 40 countries. And that gives sort of a global sense. I mean, one of the important aspects of Christianity, and certainly a feature of Catholicism, is the global church. And so you can't really, be simply domestic or monochrome. And I think, again, how important this is becoming in our world today, to have a sense of the diversity and have mutual respect for people of other cultures and other traditions. So a student here sitting in the classroom is not only with their fellow U.S. folks, but they're here with people from the Sudan, from Ukraine, we have 3 graduates in Iraq and Mosul, of all places right now. God only knows what's happening to them. And we have great diversity among the American community here. We have a lot of Latinos, we have a lot of African Americans. So it's really important. I remember one of my colleagues on the faculty said he was in a discussion with the students, and one of the students, a Catholic seminarian, said, my classmate Muhammad was telling me about, because we have Muslim students studying here and Jewish students, and he was saying, when in the history of Catholicism could seminarians say, my classmate Muhammad? But it's a new world where people are understanding each other in a different way, along with all of the violence and, cleavages in the human family that we're suffering now.
And, of course, you've been here since near the beginning.
Right.
And been at the helm. Was it twice that you were head?
I was president all told about 23 years. I really got into it not because it was a lifelong ambition, sort of drafted into it somewhat reluctantly. And I served for 8 years and figured, well, I had paid my dues and was going to go back to my first love, teaching, which I did. And my successor was a wonderful human being, but the job turned out to be overwhelming to him for a variety of reasons. So he resigned, and the board, thought to give a sense of stability. We were in the midst of a capital campaign at that time, and they asked if I would come back. So I did. After a year and a half absence, I found myself back at the helm, and but it was very peaceful for me to come back in a certain way, and not having sought it gives you a kind of, serenity about it, that I guess I'm supposed to be here, and I'll give it my all. But I think people knew, my colleagues on the faculty and staff knew that this was not the result of burning ambition, but was trying to be of help where I could.
What were some of the biggest challenges during your presidency?
Well, certainly always a challenge for an institution of this size is to keep strong financially, which is not simply a matter of money, but it's being able to have the resources so that people can do their work. So that led to having to really spend a lot of time in development. And as I mentioned, it's friend making, and so that was a great grace for me, really, to begin to know really thoughtful Catholics and Jewish donors as well. We had and Muslim donors also. It just opened up for me a world. So the financial challenge. The other is adapting our training to the rapidly developing environment of the church. The lay involvement, the Catholic Church has had to turn, because of the diminishing number of priests, has had to turn to well-prepared lay people to take up work, that chaplaincy and teaching work and so on, that ordinarily was done by priests and religious. So to be able to prepare laymen and women, not putting them into the mold of preparing priests and religious, respecting their own background and the circumstances of their lives, but giving them the same quality education that was given traditionally to priests and religious. That's called for a lot of adaptation, even things like scheduling, to have evening and weekend courses, and to adapt to the needs as people come in, maybe with less kind of background preparation, to provide all of the kind of curricular adjustments that one needs to do this, to keep the institution alive and responsive. Also, I think the ecumenical and interreligious, we had from the beginning of CTU a Jewish studies program here through a sort of wonderful happenstance. But only in 1999, we began a Muslim studies program here. And that was from the results of one of a great donor of CTU who happened to go on a trip with me to the Middle East. And although a very experienced businessman with a great sense of the world around him, he realized how little he knew about the Muslim community, and said that this is a growing reality and let's do something about this. And that led to the establishment here of a Muslim studies program that's become very important to us.
As you look back on your tenure as president here, what would you say would be the most satisfying thing about what you were able to accomplish with the help of all the people here?
Right. Well, that last point's important. The help of all the people. It's always a collaborative thing. I would say, strangely in a way, maybe something I probably had not anticipated when I began this job was the network of relationships with members of the board, with lay men and women who have been friends of CTU and supported CTU. It's been satisfying not only because they help us with their support, but for me it was a constant education to sort of see the world through different eyes. It can happen as an academic, maybe especially in the field of theology, that you can look at the business community and feel, there's some compromise there or something. But then you get to meet people who are can summit business people, but also people of integrity and people who care about the church and care about human thriving. And you see their spirit, and you learn respect for them, and you develop friendship, and you get inside their families. You baptize their children, and you preside at their weddings of their sons and daughters, and you're there at their funerals. And you become a pastor in a way. As a president of an institution like this, you also become a pastor to an ensemble of wonderful people. And when I first came in, I thought, well, I knew the academic side of things, but this other stuff, I really didn't know that so well. But I learned it, and it turned out to be the most satisfying part of it.
I want to ask a little bit more about your own scholarship as an expert on the New Testament. in watching one of your lectures, again, on the first parts of Matthew, I got this sense of unbridled enthusiasm and happiness at digging into the context of how Matthew really goes back and traces the rabbinic line and gives legitimacy to what Jesus was doing, where he's the fulfillment. And it was really fun to watch that. What joy do you take in digging through these documents to find and meaning, purpose, and relevance for today's world? I'm just curious.
Well, that's a wonderful question and touches a big part of my life, actually, that I try to sustain even in the midst of administrative things. I was blessed in the seminary days to have two great teachers in Scripture, Father Barnabas Ahern and Carol Stuhmiller. And they had a great love for the text and were very rigorous in their teaching and scholarship and demanding that you really, address the text and see it in its complexity. Then when I went to graduate school, the person who turned out to be my dissertation, we called him Dr. Fodder, and was Franz Nehring was his name, a consummate, fearsome scholar. I mean, he struck fear in the hearts of all his students because he knew so much and he was so demanding. But I learned from him the rigors and the need for integrity of scholarship, of pursuing truth, and with whatever the consequences. And he applied that to the Scriptures. And, at the time it was often painful to try to please him with my work, but I learned from him and developed, I think, a habit of scholarship, of a style of scholarship that really, had some depth and integrity. And I've always been grateful that my sort of professional subject matter was something like the Scriptures that are so life-giving. And, so what you study and prepare for a class or some writing that you do or research you're doing is also texts that express the reality of God and have a vision of human life that is so beautiful. And so that's one of the things when I'm teaching my students, I feel the very first thing that they should try to foster and develop is a love for the text. That these are sacred writings. They have a lot of complexity to them. There's a lot of history behind them, and there's a lot of things to try to, integrate. But in the ensemble, this is an extraordinarily rich body of literature, sacred literature, and to master it, to know it intimately, and to be able to proclaim it, explain it to others in a way that could also help them catch fire, I think is a great mission to have. So that's sort of, my philosophy in a way that I try and as best I can to communicate in my teaching and what I hope that my students will pick up a little bit of.
You've had a terrific career in academia, but at the same time you've done a lot of work to make the Gospels accessible to the lay reader through a variety of different publications and periodicals. Could you speak to that part of your life as well?
Yeah, it's one of the great outcomes of the Second Vatican Council, and that the council was going on, as you know, in the early 60s, and I was a seminarian. I was ordained in 1967. So all of this was happening at, as I was preparing for priesthood, and all of it was very illuminating and exciting. And one of the most important things the council did was to sort of renew for Catholicism the role of the Scriptures and the love of the Scriptures, and called for giving access to the Scriptures on the part of the ordinary lay Catholic. A lot of Catholics respected the Bible and so on, but it would sit on the coffee table and gather dust. It was not something they read. They were a little wary of picking up and reading it. And so right from the start, the goal of trying to make the scriptures accessible, not simply to your peers in the academic world, but to people in the parishes. So through writing at a popular level, through doing workshops and study days and so on, that has been a constant commitment of mine and many other Catholic biblical scholars of that generation particularly. And it was something that keeps your feet on the ground. You know, if you're only speaking to fellow scholars, you can get into kind of code words and jargon. But when you're speaking to the person who asks, you know, I remember going to a parish and one guy says, I know the New Testament. What is this Old Testament you're talking? You know, or what do you mean by chapter 5, verse 6? What are we, you know, very fundamental things that you can take for granted, or ideas people have about what the scriptures are saying until they've had the thrill of actually reading the text and seeing what it has to say. So that whole acquaintance with the way intelligent, honest, but not professional people would encounter the text, I think that helps ground you and give you ideas about what the meaning of the scriptures can be. So.
As President Emeritus, you're still writing, you're still teaching, you're still doing international travel. What continues to motivate you, to excite you about this life you've chosen?
Well, it's the scriptures, the teaching and proclaiming the scriptures and publishing. And it was always was my first love, I guess you could say, and something that I really tried to sustain even in the midst of having a lot of administrative work. And I did that for a lot of reasons. I think as the president of a theology school, you should also, understand the academic life and be part of that process, but also that it was a kind of nourishment for me to, and sometimes administrative things, which I think is also an important ministry, but it can be draining emotionally, but turning to the scriptures and doing some writing was important. So now that I'm free of my administrative duties as president, I could, it wasn't so much as having to turn back, it was more now amplifying something that was always there. But I'm also, trying to say I've learned a lot about theological education and about administration and management. I don't want to lose that lesson. So I'm also working on a project to try to reflect on the role of administration and management from a biblical point of view. There is some literature on this, but not a whole lot, especially not a lot in Catholic circles. More evangelicals have written a lot of thoughtful things about this. So I'm trying to say, how can I blend now the lessons I've learned and the experiences I've had in administering an institution, and bring that into some kind of interaction with the biblical word. So I want to try to keep both tracks going a little bit anyway.
I watched a recording of your retirement homily, and you talked about the many blessings you've experienced in this life and this career. What do you feel at this point in life has been your greatest blessing?
Wow. Well, I think my Catholic faith is one. I mean, that is something I still marvel in and rejoice in. And certainly the calling to be a priest, to be able to, as we were talking earlier, be part of people's lives as they try to find the face of God. That has been a privilege to me that it's always fresh for me. And it's always in a way surprising for me that I find myself in these circumstances. So that's been a blessing. There's a lot of things and people that have flowed into that have sustained that in me, my family and friends and colleagues. But those gifts are at the heart of it for me, my faith, and then the calling to be a priest.
As I come to the end of my prepared questions, I always ask, what did you think when you got the envelope from the Lincoln Academy that announced that you were going to be a laureate?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I have to say I was taken completely by surprise in this. I only had a vague knowledge about the Academy, and I got this letter and I thought, well, wow, what is this all about, and where is this coming from, you know? And the more I learned about it, the more I felt very humbled by this. And then I saw the names of my classmates, as you could say. And these were people, several of them I knew, or certainly knew about, but all of them I knew about, and some of them I knew, and I thought, wow, this is a tremendous group of people here. And I must say I felt a little small compared to some real giants there. So there was a sense of real delight and gratitude and humility in this. I enjoyed particularly, you know, the coach. He gave his address. He had to give his speech early. He had to go back that evening, Mike Kaczynski, and a lot of his sentiments, it touched me deeply, because he also, I think, felt caught by surprise. And even though he's an eminent coach and leader, but the sense of making you think about your life and about how you've been blessed by your family and by the opportunities you had that were given to you. And these all come to the fore when you get an honor like this. You don't let it go to your head, it goes to your heart. So